Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 269 is almost here. It's a little over a week away, so I wanted to start on some prediction videos because I'm going to be doing a bunch of prediction videos for UFC 269. This video is going to be my full breakdown and prediction of Pedro Munhoz versus Dominick Cruz. This is on the prelims, which is absolutely insane. This is an amazing bantamweight fight, and I'm so excited for this fight. So you look at the tail of the tape. Dominick Cruz is currently ranked number 10, while Pedro Munhoz is currently ranked number 8. Dominick Cruz is 36 years old. Pedro Munhoz is 35 years old. Dominick Cruz is 5'8". Pedro Munhoz is 5'6". And Cruz has a 68-inch reach, and Munhoz has a 65-inch reach. So a little bit of a reach advantage for Dominick Cruz. I don't know if that'll play a big factor in the fight. But you look at Pedro Munhoz, he's only won one fight out of his last 4 fights, which is just insane when you put it that way. But it sounds a lot worse than it is. You look at his last fight, it was against Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo has looked like an absolute world beater at 135, and it was a competitive fight. I thought Aldo won all 3 rounds, but it was a very competitive fight. Munhoz just had trouble closing the distance. Just could not find Jose Aldo, and Aldo was just prepared for those low calf kicks, was getting out of the way each and every time. And Aldo just looked so dialed in that fight. You know, I don't really hold that loss too much against Pedro Munhoz. You know, Jose Aldo is arguably in title contention right now, and he's fighting Rob Font very soon, and he could be a #1 contender coming out of that fight. Before that, he beat Jimmy Rivera. Jimmy Rivera, I don't even believe he's with the UFC anymore. I believe the UFC cut him. But Jimmy Rivera was so criminally underrated in the bantamweight division. And I actually believe Pedro Munhoz is criminally underrated in the bantamweight division. But Jimmy Rivera is a solid, quality guy. Hits very hard, very well-rounded. And Pedro Munhoz went out there and just calf kicked him to death. Looked great in that fight. And I know people, don't really know Jimmy Rivera all that well. But believe me, he is an elite guy. Maybe not, the elite of the elite up there with the world-class guys, but without a doubt, top 10, top 15 guy. And for Pedro Munhoz to go out there and kind of make it look easy against Jimmy Rivera, I think was a phenomenal performance. Before that, he lost to Frankie Edgar by split decision. And while this was a competitive fight, and I wouldn't necessarily call it a robbery, I think that Pedro Munhoz won this fight. And Pedro Munhoz, this was a 5-round main event. If you're wondering about Pedro Munhoz's cardio, he looked very good in the 4th and 5th round. He ate some shots from Frankie Edgar, but he was just pressuring Frankie Edgar the entire fight, landing hard shots, busting up Frankie Edgar, and I really believe the judges got it wrong. Before that, he had a unanimous decision loss to Aljamain Sterling. And, the last fight I'm going to talk about before that was a KO win over Cody Garbrandt at UFC 235 back in March of 2019. Crazy, wild fight, just slinging back and forth. Both guys landing hard shots. And eventually Pedro Munhoz puts Cody Garbrandt out, who was the former champion. And Cody Garbrandt landed some hard shots himself, and Pedro Munhoz just ate him. He has an absolute granite chin. Now you look at Dominick Cruz, and Dominick Cruz, for me, and my analysis of this fight, my breakdown of this fight is just such, there's really no definitive answer on Dominick Cruz because he was a world-class bantamweight at one time, but there's been so many injuries, so much time off. Since 2016, he's only fought twice. So, he lost to Cody Garbrandt back in December of 2016. He lost his title to Cody Garbrandt. And he did not fight again till May of 2020. And he stepped in on short notice to fight Henry Cejudo. We'll talk about that in a second. His last fight was against Casey Kenny. He won by split decision. I thought he won this fight 2 rounds to 1, or he could have arguably won all 3 rounds. But it was a very competitive fight. And, Casey Kenny isn't the most, elite world-class competition. But again, Dominick Cruz had been out for about a little under a year at this time. This was his shortest layoff he had. And maybe, he's getting a little bit older. He's 36 years old. Casey Kenny's a younger guy. And people started speculating after this fight, has Dominick Cruz lost it? I don't think this was a spectacular performance by any means. And for me, I thought Dominick Cruz, this was a fight against Casey Kenny, where the UFC kind of gave him a matchup where you can go out there and look good, like another fight I'm going to talk about in a minute. And he didn't. It was a win, but all 3 rounds were competitive. I think 2 of the 3 rounds could have really went either way, and I think the 3rd round definitely went to Dominick Cruz, if I'm remembering correctly. That was in March of this year at UFC 259. So before we talk about anything else and I get into my exact prediction, before he lost to Cody Garbrandt, where he was just absolutely outclassed by Cody Garbrandt, I picked Dominick Cruz in this fight. I think a lot of people picked Dominick Cruz in this fight. I was shocked the way Cody Garbrandt went out there and absolutely dominated Dominick Cruz. I mean, he was hitting him with huge shots, dropping him, beating him up, dancing as he was doing it and showboating. And, it was a phenomenal performance, world-class performance by Cody Garbrandt. And, I really don't know what happened in that fight. Maybe Cody Garbrandt was just too fast for him. That was all the way back in 2016. Then he took 3.5 years off. Before that, he beat Uriah Faber. Before that, he beat TJ Dillashaw. And he came back after a 2-year layoff, beat TJ Dillashaw. Dillashaw was the champion. It was a split decision win. But I thought Dominick Cruz won that fight. And one last fight I wanted to talk about, because Dominick Cruz has this crazy injury history. He's tearing ACLs. He's tearing his groin. He was out from 2011, October of 2011, when he fought Mighty Mouse, all the way up until 2014, September 2014, when he returned and fought Takeru Mitsugaki. And Dominick Cruz, in the lead up to this fight at UFC 178, a lot of people were asking him, are you worried? You've been out for so long. Do you think you still have it, this and that? And he said, I don't believe in ring rust. He said, I'm training every day. I'm improving on my skills. I don't believe it. He went out there and absolutely starched Takeru Mitsugaki. Then he comes back, 2 years later and fights TJ Dillashaw, because he got injured after the Takeru Mitsugaki finish. He finished him in the first round with ground and pound, hurt him on the feet, finished him up against the fence. Then he was injured again, took off 2 years, and comes back and beats TJ Dillashaw. It was a split decision. It was a close fight, but I thought Dominick Cruz won this fight. So what makes this fight so hard to pick for me is prime Dominick Cruz, I think, absolutely outclasses Pedro Munhoz. And I think prime Dominick Cruz, Pedro Munhoz is a tailor-made matchup for Dominick Cruz to really look good against. But it's so hard, because I just don't know where Dominick Cruz is at. The Henry Cejudo fight, I know a lot of people just remember the finish. It was a very competitive fight. Henry Cejudo was winning the fight. He got stopped in the second round. He got caught with a big knee on. I think it was a body kick attempt by Henry Cejudo. But my point is, the fight was competitive up until that point, and Dominick Cruz came in off a almost 4-year layoff and fought Henry Cejudo for the belt on, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks notice, maybe a month at best. So for Dominick Cruz to come into that fight on a month's notice at best and be competitive with Henry Cejudo and arguably get, a terrible stoppage. I mean, it wasn't the worst stoppage I've ever seen, but it wasn't the greatest. But either way, he looked competitive against Henry Cejudo at that point in time, who had just starched TJ Dillashaw, I believe, who had just beat Marlon Moraes, who, looked like a world beater at the time and almost beat Henry Cejudo up until the round started to go on and Marlon started to fade. So it's weird, because you look at his last 2 fights, the loss to Henry Cejudo, very competitive against an elite guy in Henry Cejudo, and then the split decision win against Casey Kenny. So it's really hard for me to judge Dominick Cruz's skill set, just because he's injured so much, he's out so much, and then, this performance is great, but this performance isn't. And Pedro Munhoz, it's funny just because, again, prime Dominick Cruz, I believe Pedro Munhoz just gets absolutely outclassed, because Dominick Cruz has that weird wonky footwork, and he's constantly switching stances, and he's hard to hit, and his hands are low, and his shots are coming from all different angles. But you look at Pedro Munhoz, and, especially with an aging, slowing down Dominick Cruz, Pedro Munhoz looks like he may have the style to beat Dominick Cruz now, an aging and a guy that's kind of been figured out a little bit. Henry Cejudo went in there, started chopping down the legs. Casey Kenny was throwing hard leg kicks to slow down that movement of Dominick Cruz. And Pedro Munhoz, that's his favorite technique, is those calf kicks. And, Henry Cejudo in that fight against Dominick Cruz, it was crazy the way he was chopping the legs. John Anik, and I actually rewatched this fight because I couldn't remember it in all that much detail. John Anik said it's almost like Henry Cejudo is trying to kick through both the legs. And that's truly what it was. It was like just smashing those legs. And that's really the key to beating Dominick Cruz, in my opinion. And Pedro Munhoz has some of the best leg kicks out there. I mean, he absolutely smashed Jimmy Rivera's legs. He was beating up Frankie Edgar's legs. And I think Pedro Munhoz is going to come into this fight. I think he's going to look to smash Dominick Cruz's legs. I think he's going to look to slow down the movement. And it's a 3-round fight. I believe both guys have 5-round cardio, but Pedro Munhoz can keep up a good pace for 5 rounds. We've seen that recently. We have not seen that. We have not seen Dominick Cruz in a 5-round fight since December of 2016. So my official prediction for this fight is going to be Pedro Munhoz by decision. I'm going to say 29-28 Pedro Munhoz. I just think Dominick Cruz is just a little bit older, a little bit slower. I think Pedro Munhoz is going to plot forward, chop those legs, just kick that calf of Dominick Cruz over and over and over again. I hope Dominick Cruz comes prepared to try to defend that calf kick. I mean, Jose Aldo was able to in his last fight, but I just don't know if Cruz has enough speed anymore. Getting older, being slower, having all those knee injuries, foot injuries, groin injuries. I just think that Pedro Munhoz is going to be able to plot forward, smash the legs, slow Dominick Cruz down, land big shots, but I don't think Cruz is going to go out. And I think eventually, I think maybe Cruz wins the first round just because the movement will be very good. It'll be very fresh. And as those rounds wear on and those leg kicks start to really take effect on Dominick Cruz, I think he'll slow down. Pedro Munhoz, in turn, will then start landing some of those punches because he'll throw nice combinations off the leg kicks and eventually just start busting up Dominick Cruz and win the second and third round. Dominick Cruz has such weird striking because while it looks terrible, it's very effective in MMA. He does the weirdest thing where he's constantly moving his feet, he's ducking his head down low, and he's just swinging wild punches, almost like he's staring at the ground, throwing wild winging punches. And sometimes he lands. And, you know, even if he does land in this fight, because I think he will land some of these punches in the first round when he's very fresh, Pedro Munhoz has a granite chin. He's not putting Pedro Munhoz out. I don't see that happening at all. I think, you know, Pedro Munhoz isn't putting out Dominick Cruz. Dominick Cruz ate some of the biggest shots from Cody Garbrandt and still just kept fighting. He was not out in the Henry Cejudo fight. He ate a massive knee from Henry Cejudo. Dominick Cruz was not put out. So I really don't see either one of these guys getting finished. And it's just a matter of, I think, you know, going into this fight, if Dominick Cruz is able to deal with those calf kicks, like Jose Aldo was able to deal with Pedro Munhoz's calf kicks in his most recent fight at UFC 265, I think Dominick Cruz wins this fight. But with that being said, I don't think he's going to be able to deal with them. I think they're going to get chopped early and often. I think Pedro Munhoz is going to walk him down, throwing big shots. I think early he's going to miss quite a bit of them because Dominick Cruz's movement is so hard to get a read on. But as Dominick Cruz starts to slow down, those legs start to kind of give out on him, you know, just getting smashed by, I mean, Pedro Munhoz has some of the nastiest leg kicks. I think Pedro Munhoz is going to start finding some of those shots. One thing that I think is a massive benefit for Dominick Cruz, and I hope, you know, maybe he consciously thought of this, I'm so happy this is on a pay-per-view in a big arena rather than the Apex, because at the Apex, they used a smaller cage. The arena, they used the 30-foot cage, and I think that's a massive advantage for Dominick Cruz. And if it would have been at the Apex, it would have been a massive advantage for Pedro Munhoz because of the limited space. So I think that's great for Dominick Cruz. If Dominick Cruz can deal with those leg kicks early, I think he wins the fight. But I just don't think he's going to be able to. So again, I have Dominick Cruz winning the first round, Pedro Munhoz starting to wear on him, smashing him up second and third round, and Pedro Munhoz winning by decision 29-28. Guys, do me a favor, if you enjoy these prediction videos, make sure you subscribe. Don't forget to like the video. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for watching.